That's one of the things that always gets me, Vikas, is that you have the apprehensions that have gone up. Well, I'm almost more curious about the people you didn't apprehend, and those are some of the problems. We don't know exactly a number. They do keep those numbers. They've got to be estimates because who knows what the actual numbers are.
Well, that's absolutely right. And many times it's easy to talk about this in the amorphous or the abstract, but being in San Diego here and being in federal court day in and day out, I can tell you the consequences of these actions are palpable. You can touch them, you can feel them, you can taste them. You know, it only takes one trip down to federal court, Southern District here in San Diego, to see an arraignment on an indictment that's day in and day out of hundreds of people weekly now who are crossing the border illegally, arms offenses, narcotics offenses, human trafficking and smuggling offenses. And to your point, and to Melanie's point as well, yes, the ones who get away are invisible for a certain amount of time until, unfortunately, there's a catastrophe and a harm to the society. They're not gone forever. Most of the time, they're part of these criminal organizations, and unfortunately, the effects will be felt by the citizenry.
Because I wanted to touch again on what you're talking about, the impact that the illegal immigration has on the communities. You mentioned San Diego. I have somebody close to me who is involved in San Antonio. Now, it's not right next to the border, but it's a destination for a lot of people to come across the border. And I've been out to dinner and had him point and say, see who that right there is, one of the biggest drug dealers, drug kingpins up from Mexico. They're shopping here. I mean, it really changes the economy. It changes the society when you have this flood of illegals come across. I'm not saying everybody is a criminal, but it definitely has its impact, doesn't it?
Well, absolutely. And if we focus on the compartment of those who may be criminally minded or motivated, let's not forget that the cartels are not those that say, hey, you know what, we're just going to go ahead and see how it goes. These are calculated business enterprises. So we have individuals who are brought across the border, and that means tens of thousands of dollars, from the coyotes all the way back to the money going to Mexico, to the cartels that are behind it. The narcotics, the same thing, but exponentially even more powerful and profitable for the cartels. So is it directly in our face? Absolutely. And you talk about immigration. We have one of the most beautiful convention centers, the San Diego Convention Center here in our fine city. But up until recently, it was occupied fully, not by the homeless, not by the veterans who've served our country, but for those who crossed illegally. It's slapping everyone who pays their taxes and want a safer environment, frankly, with all due respect, in the face.
All right, Vikas, we'll leave it there. So, Vikas, your thoughts on this, on election. I mean, California actually is noted for the fact, I believe, it allows some ballot harvesting.
That's absolutely right. And to the chagrin of most of us, all of us law-abiding citizens who want to have our votes counted, the problem here is the train has left the station. And once that happens, it becomes the norm. And to change the norm as creatures of comfort, we are always going to be met with significant opposition. Here, the opposition is, well, I'm brown, so I'm just too dumb to know the difference, and I can't figure out where to vote. Melanie, she's African-American. Well, she's too dumb, too. Well, we're here to tell you that's not the case. That's not the reality. And, you know, Bobby's right and hit the nail on the head. This is exactly the majorative way of looking at race. Which compartment do you fit in, and are you smart enough to make the decisions? The time has come. It's going to change. It's going to be a battle. We'll continue to have opposition. But to have people gathering hundreds and thousands of votes and say, hey, trust me, buddy, they'll be turning up in the right place, we're just not going to settle for that much longer.
Right. And again, as I understand it, California does allow people to go and pick up, and they're supposed to be obligated to turn them into the proper location. But it's like Bobby was saying, it could go on both sides. You could go pick it up and say, oh, I know how they would vote. That's not going to make it. I know how that. It's just, it makes sense to have some control over how many ballots are out there, who's filling out the ballot, who's delivering the ballot, or as the former president would like, go vote on election day. That's another solution right there.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
exactly right. And let me just point out one more thing. It's not the affluent communities, the gated communities that have people knocking on the doors saying, hey, by the way, at 6 p.m., we're going to start harvesting ballots. It's those that are minority communities, the demographic, socioeconomic classes that may be a little bit more prejudiced in our economic arena that we live in now. You know, you don't see knocks on the doors of the affluent communities. What does that tell us? Again, it's this pejorative, we know better than you do, we'll cast the vote for you. Let me ask a question. What's the reason for it? Why can't we cast our own votes? Without a definitive answer, I just can't seem to find the logic in allowing ballot harvesting.
And by the way, I have no doubt, Vic, that even those numbering, somehow they had to manipulate it, excuse me, so that it actually was lower than it was last year. And they talked about that. That's an example of how the Biden economy was working.
Absolutely. I'm still just wondering where I can find $3 a gallon gas. Let's not forget, I'm in California over here, so we're close to almost $4.50. But, you know, it's really insulting. It truly is insulting. And I can understand in a boardroom meeting amongst people that may feel like they are more intelligent than others, like you and I, who may say, well, let's just, you know, they're okay. The peons are doing fine. 16 cents is really good. But to actually publish this and to actually put it out there as something to brag about is just extraordinarily insulting. And it's not the right, it's not the left. Anyone who has any cognition of dollars and cents will understand how menial of a quote unquote victory it is. And again, how insulting it is to try to convince us that it has any magnitude of effect.
By the way, I haven't connected it directly, but it's not a coincidence that the government has given trillions of dollars over the past year, year and a half. And that was even before Biden took office, although they came in and spent a couple trillion right off the bat. Didn't bother them at all to spend that. Some of this money going directly to people, and then demand for products going up. That creates inflation. And right now you have them liking that. And they like to continue, Vic, giving away this money as if there's no connection at all between free money from the government, free, I put that in quotation marks, and having an effect on products that people buy. There is a connection.
Absolutely. And just like any small business owner like ourselves would say, you know, when you put something into effect, a certain policy, you're not going to feel the effect of it right away. It may come 3 months, 18 months down the line. And to print out trillions of dollars, and people will say, well, hey, we're not in inflation. We're not in a hyperinflationary world right now. Well, we don't know. We have never printed this much money as a country and put it directly in the hands of those who can spend. So hyperinflation, I think we are living it now. Everything from toothpicks to avocados to cars, homes, anything you can imagine and buy with a US dollar, the prices are skyrocketing. I don't want to lose one point, and I feel remiss if I didn't object to a few of the statements made earlier. I don't think it's the left being out of touch with reality and denying an inflationary economy. You would have to be really just oblivious to the world and the environment to believe that that is in fact the case. I believe the left is intentionally understanding that we're facing these hardships, but trying to convince the mass populace that it's otherwise. How can one really believe 16 cents is in any economic calculation a savings on a hot dog one day out of 365 days? This is an intentional move to sort of dumb down the public and have us clap our hands for an amorphous and a very empty victory at best. It's an intentional move, frankly.
Let's bring our panel back in. I did want to start with you, legal guy, spent a lot of time in the courtroom. Does he have to be careful what he says about him? Now, there are no charges against him. It's against his company, his CFO. We don't know where this goes. But I was just kind of curious when I saw him reading, he's got a teleprompter there. Does he have to be careful what he says on this topic? Then he got back to some very comfortable topics. But what should we be thinking of when we see him talking about it?
Well, I think a green lawyer, and by green I mean perhaps an inexperienced lawyer, might say, former president, please keep your mouth shut and don't say anything. But, you know, former President Donald Trump, he knows what the truth is. He knows the facts are there, and he knows there's been this inquisition into his family's businesses and finances for years now. And so when you know what's behind door number two and you're willing to fight that fight, meaning common sense will eventually prevail, you really can't hold back. And when you have political prosecutions, and for all of our listeners and viewers out there, please understand, the only apolitical prosecution in our nation is that which is reported by a unrelated citizen bystander who sees a crime. Anything other than that is politically motivated, either by the federal government and the Attorney General's office dictating what policies should be acted upon, or local politicians who run for, let's say, district attorney that run on a certain platform and must prosecute people to come true on their word. These are political prosecutions, and the great gatekeeper of our nation may be a nullification by a jury if this isn't thrown out because of a separation of powers and sovereignty argument well beforehand. I don't think he should be careful. He knows the facts. He needs to jump in head first and attack these allegations.
Vic, I don't know how it is. I know California schools have challenges galore. I lived in California at one point, and those challenges have gotten away. They haven't been resolved. I would imagine this is just making things worse, especially for public schools.
Absolutely. And let me just shed a bit of light on the irony of California. You know, as a young boy, I moved over here in around 1984, and I was expecting, as my family did, a very inclusive state of California. But as time goes on, and as we have our own children who have to seek their own education, we start to realize that the consistent emphasis on race and ethnicity does nothing more but make us all fit into different compartments that can then be used as the basis to divide us. This is not what we want as parents. We don't want our kids, my two boys, to say, that's Black John, or that's Indian Josephine, or that's Irish, Johnny's uncle. We don't want that. We want to be colorblind. That's all we want. And this consistent, intrusive emphasis on race being used to define what's in our minds and our souls is destructive. And that's exactly why you see so many parents, to Melanie's astute point, protesting these issues, only to be dragged out of these hearings, sometimes in handcuffs and facing criminal charges. The movement is strong, and it will persist.
Vikas Bajaj, thank you so much all for being with us. And folks, that's all the time we have today on American Agenda.